business process management in ERP implementations, a new autonomous AI agent, and why business process standardization fails in ERP projects. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 213 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 213. This is the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, including people, process, technology, and strategy. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And joining me, as always, is our co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to the audience for being here. Great, fun conversations we're going to have here today around one of my favorite topics, which is business process management. We're going to have a guest on the show later, Scott Adams, who's actually a client of Third Stages. He's heading up an ERP implementation with our team at his company called Victaulic, and he's a business process management guy in charge of this project. And he's going to bring his perspective on how to address business process management and business process improvements during an ERP implementation. So we'll have him on the show here in just a few minutes. But before we bring him on, we're going to get into some social media questions as well as some newsworthy topics around ServiceNow. They've recently acquired MoveWorks. We'll talk about that acquisition and what it means to the future of ServiceNow in the enterprise tech space. And then we'll talk about Manus, a new autonomous AI agent, and what that means to the future of tech as well. And then later in the show, after our interview with Scott from Victaulic, we'll talk about why business process standardization fails in ERP projects and what some of the biggest challenges are with business process standardization. So not only will we talk about business process optimization with our guest here in a few minutes, we'll also continue to talk about business process standardization later in the show as well. So if you like process improvement type stuff, this is an episode you definitely don't want to miss. And of course, within that conversation, we'll talk a lot about change management and overall implementation strategies and whatnot, but should be a great conversation. But before we jump in and get to some of these other topics, what are some of the social media questions we've received recently, Darian?
Yeah, this first one is from TikTok, and it's from when you were talking about this article. The title of it was Elon Musk spells danger for Accenture, McKinsey, and their competitors. This comment is, this is an easy one. Consulting firms are a scam, especially when it comes to federal government.
Well, that's a setup. That's a setup of a question there. Well, I do think I see why people don't like consultants. I've been a consultant my whole career, so I'm used to all the jokes about consultants. And back when I was first starting out, I remember one of the common jokes about consultants was, or as a story that would get passed around over email, sort of a fable about the consultant that comes in and gets paid all this money to a farmer to count the number of sheep that he has. So the farmer says, I've got 50 sheep or whatever it is. Can you come in and validate that? And he pays him all this money to come in and say, yeah, you've got 50 sheep. So it was just, of course, it was a lot funnier and the story was a lot better than I just told it. But there's jokes and comments and refrain like that have gone around for decades now, ever since I've been in the space about the value the consultants bring. And I think it's actually a healthy challenge to the industry, because I think in the consulting space, I've seen a lot of waste, and I've seen a lot of inefficiency that benefits the consulting firm but doesn't benefit the client. So I think it's worth calling it out and worth questioning your consulting partner to make sure you're delivering value. And if your consultants can't deliver value that at least exceeds the amount of fees you're paying to them, then you need to question why you've got that relationship with them. So I think it's true across the board, but in federal government and government in general, there's a sort of not a lack of accountability, but a sort of mentality in the government space that we're going to outsource this project to the real experts because we don't know a lot about technology. So we're going to outsource it to one of the big consulting firms, and the big consulting firms will take advantage of that. Having worked at one early in my career, I know how hard they push to get even the most junior or most unqualified people onto a project so they can start billing their time. So the focus is on, how do I get all my people sitting on the bench? How do I get them billable versus how do I maximize the value that we're delivering to a client? So I think it's worth calling out the industry, and I think we should continue to do that. So I think it's a valid comment and something worth exploring if you're working with any consulting firm.
Yeah, absolutely. This next question / comment is also a really good one as well. I think something that we've talked about before, but it's lessons learned from ERP failures are so important, but also so are lessons that are learned from first time ERP implementations that succeed. What are some of those important lessons from those type of successes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the most successful organizations that we work with, the clients that are most successful, are the ones that have a couple of shared characteristics. First of all, it doesn't necessarily have much to do with the level of experience going through projects like these. I think there's a misconception that, if your team or your organization hasn't been through an ERP project X number of times over the years, then you're not likely to succeed. There's certainly some benefit to having been through these projects in the past and the battle scars that come along with that. And so that, it can help, but that's not actually the most important thing. I think the most important thing is how organizations treat the projects and how they view the projects and how they plan for the projects. The companies that are most successful are the ones that take ownership of the project. They don't just assume that the software vendor or the system integrator is going to do it all for them. They actually manage those vendors rather than letting the vendors manage them. And I know it sounds weird and maybe counterintuitive or like a no-brainer in some cases, but it's amazing how many organizations flip that around and say, we're not the experts, so let's just let the technical vendors manage the entire thing, and they'll take advantage of that. I mean, they'll force fit technology where it doesn't belong if you let them. So because that's what they do, that's their job. So you have to flip that around and say, no, actually, this is our project. We're in control of it. We're going to manage it our way. Yes, you're going to take inputs from your technology vendors, your system integrator, your third-party consultants like Third Stage. But at the end of the day, it's your project and you've got to own it. And that's why when we're working with clients, we always tell our clients, we're not here to be a separate team. We're here to be part of your team so that you, the clients, can manage this project and be in control of it and have ownership of it, visibility into it, et cetera. So the companies that do that and go in with the mentality of, this is our project, we're going to manage it, and they push back and ask questions and are very engaged in the process, those are the ones that are most successful. The other thing is, I would say the other shared characteristic for successful organizations is that they also have a level of healthy skepticism. They ask questions, and you get a proposal from a software vendor, you need to question the assumptions. Because software vendors typically look at technology, they don't look at business transformation. So they're going to come at it from the angle of how long is it, or what do I need to do to design, build, and deploy technology. But you as a client are looking at it from the perspective of, how do I change my business and make my business better? And those are two very different things. So when a vendor comes in and says, hey, I can implement the solution for you in 18 months or whatever the number is, you have to start asking questions like, well, what does that include? What doesn't include? What are the assumptions behind how fast we have to make decisions or how quickly these changes will get rolled out? And what I think you typically find with the successful organizations is they say 18 months doesn't make any sense. It's more like 24 months or whatever the number is. And it's not because they necessarily want to take longer. It's because they ask the right questions and they understand that this is an overall program, and the technical implementer is just one piece or one input into that program. They, as the client, have to take ownership for the overall program. And that includes the technical vendors, but it also includes change management, the data migration, the process improvement, integration between systems, architecture, end user training, all this stuff that the system integrator typically isn't going to do, you're responsible for. And so you've got to wrap all that stuff into the overall program and define what that total program is. And so the organizations that have the skepticism and I don't even want to say distrust, because it's not distrust. It's healthy skepticism. You have to ask the right questions, and it gets back to the first point of taking ownership of the project. So those are probably the two biggest criteria. I'd say a third one that's really important would be the clients that have a leader that's not necessarily a technical person. So either they're a COO or a CFO, and they're sort of the executive sponsor, and they're the ones that are ultimately responsible for the project, or they're a CIO who understands operations really, really well. They're not your traditional tech guy that, grew up in the, in the 90s or 80s or whatever, learning all about technology and coding and development. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but usually that mindset and that leadership style and the perception of that leader is going to be different than someone who comes at it from a business perspective. You have a lot more credibility within the organization. You're able to view things from a business transformation perspective, not just a technology perspective. And so organizations that can find that right balance between knowing that IT needs to be involved in the project, of course, but they also need really strong business leadership and business ownership within the project, and ideally a business leader that's leading the overall project.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll definitely be able to get some insight into a leader like that later today in the conversation with Scott. But before we get there, I want to get into our first newsworthy topic of the day, which is about ServiceNow's acquisition of MoveWorks for $2.85 billion. This is ServiceNow's biggest acquisition yet, and it's a clear move to strengthen their AI capabilities, particularly in agentic AI and enterprise search. MoveWorks is known for its AI-driven employee support tools, which help automate IT and HR requests. The company has rapidly grown, reaching over $100 million in annual recurring revenue and serving more than 5 million users in just 18 months. ServiceNow has already had deep integrations with MoveWorks, sharing 250 customers. So this acquisition seems more like a natural progression almost. But I want to get I have some key questions about this, about what it means for the industry going forward and how it could affect everything. So Eric, what do you think about what does this acquisition mean for broader enterprise automation landscape? And is this a response to growing competition from Microsoft and Salesforce potentially?
Yeah. Yes to that last part. I think it is a response to growing competitive pressures. And I think in terms of AI, it's a really interesting race we're seeing, with vendors that are scrambling to either create their own capabilities and develop it fast enough, but also companies like ServiceNow that are out acquiring AI technology providers. But I think ServiceNow is in a unique position, though, because, if you think about the type of software they provide versus other more transactional or more back office types of ERP systems, ServiceNow is probably or arguably the most ripe for agentic AI in terms of being able to automate some of those workflows and use more artificial intelligence to engage with either end customers that are submitting tickets or customer service complaints or whatever the case may be, or internal ticketing and workflow management around, IT help desk support or whatever the use case is for how you're using ServiceNow. So, so much of ServiceNow is customer facing, and it lends itself well to that agentic AI sort of approach. So I think it's good that they're out acquiring a provider that already does it really well rather than trying to create it themselves, assuming they can integrate it, the technology well into their stack, which I assume they've thought through that. And Bill McDermott, who's the CEO of ServiceNow, used to be the CEO of SAP. So I know he's an aggressive leader, and I know they brought him in to ServiceNow to help aggressively grow not only their technical capabilities, but also their market share in the overall enterprise tech space. So I think overall it makes sense just from what little I know about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you think that MoveWorks AI will enhance ServiceNow's existing enterprise automation tools?
Yeah, I think it'll further enhance it. I mean, I think the AI capabilities, from what I know about it and what you've described about it, will help speed up and automate some of that stuff that even with the automation of ServiceNow historically seems a bit manual now that you have agentic AI options and chatbots and things of that nature that can take over some of that human interaction. So I think it seems to fit really nicely into their business model and what the capabilities of the software already are.
Yeah, for sure. And with, I guess, looking at the future, what does this deal signal about the future of AI-driven enterprise solutions? And should organizations be preparing for an AI-first automation strategy?
Yeah, I mean, even if you wanted to ignore AI, I don't think it's really possible to as you're going through these digital transformations, just because AI is getting baked into just about every enterprise or business technology out there. So I think it's just recognizing that change is coming, and these technologies are changing way faster than you as an organization are ever going to be able to, and that's okay. Just recognizing that gap or that divide between the way you operate today and the way newer technologies can change your business, just knowing that divide is getting greater and the change is more opportunistic, and there's a lot more upside potential, but there's also a lot more risk now because you're talking about a greater divide between current state and where you could be with new technologies. So I think just recognizing that gap and recognizing that you don't have to bite off more than you can chew just because the industry is headed that way. I mean, just because we're all talking about AI and AI is getting baked into every nook and cranny of every technology that seems to be out there right now doesn't mean you have to go all in on AI or go all in on these big, massive changes overnight. You can take more incremental improvements where you're sort of cherry picking parts of your business that are going to most benefit from it, or maybe make the easiest case for change. So not getting overwhelmed by it, I guess, would be the other recommendation I would give.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of AI, it kind of nicely flows into our next newsworthy topic of the day, which is the emergence of Magnus, which is an autonomous AI agent developed by Chinese startup Monica. Magnus is gaining attention for its ability to independently handle complex tasks like sorting resumes, analyzing stock trends, and even building websites, a step beyond traditional chat-based AI models. This development has drawn comparisons to DeepSeek, another AI Chinese model that we talked about recently, and then also systems like ChatGPT. However, while some see Magnus as a major leap forward, others are raising concerns about the accuracy, privacy, and security risks given the competition in the AI development between China and Western companies. So this is definitely something that we'll continue to watch. But Eric, how do you see Magnus influencing the global AI industry, especially as China continues to push forward with AI innovation?
Yeah, you raise a couple of really good points. One is the cybersecurity concern around, anytime you have any sort of AI tool, regardless of whether it's a Chinese based solution or from some other part of the world, you have to worry about that being a potential backdoor, for a cybersecurity attack. No matter how well locked down the rest of your enterprise tech stack is, if you put an AI agent on top of it, and that AI agent has a loophole or a vulnerability, that's going to give potential hackers access to all your systems that are touching that AI agent. So you just have to be aware that you're creating another cybersecurity risk by doing that. But I think overall, it's just amazing how fast all this AI, the landscape is changing. As you were asking this question, I was just thinking to myself, by the time this episode is released, my comment might be completely obsolete because it's changing so fast. I mean, a week or two, it seems like every week there's something new happening and changing within the AI space. But it's just a good reminder that we're not anywhere close to being done with even just understanding how AI is going to affect businesses. I think we're just getting started on that. And this is a good indication of that.
Yeah, for sure. And something I found interesting, I guess, about Magnus was it's being positioned as an autonomous agent rather than a chatbot. What do you think there are like risks or benefits of moving away from a chatbot interface more towards an independent AI decision-making model? Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that I wonder that too, like if, how much human intervention or oversight could you have with an autonomous agent like that? Would it be too easy or too tempting just to let it sort of run on autopilot and let it do its thing? And then does that mean if something's not right, which will happen, it's going to be, off base in some areas of whatever you asked it to do? Is that a lot of rework? Is that harder than just having the more chat-based engagement and interaction? I feel like in the short term, where we're at right now, the chat-based approach makes more sense because we're all learning how to engage with AI. I mean, I've been using it for well over a year on a daily basis. I mean, I use it multiple times a day now. I'm always on AI doing something, and I'm always learning new ways of automating just little tiny pieces of what I do throughout the day, and it's adding up to like really big material changes to how I work. And so I think that's just an example, like at a personal level, of how I'm still trying to figure out how I interact with AI and how it works and all the power and capabilities of it. And if I didn't have that constant chat, kind of back and forth and the corrections and the learning how to talk to AI and all that stuff, if I hadn't gone through that, I don't know that I don't know how I would use AI otherwise, effectively. So I think as we think about teaching AI and training AI, there has to be that human component, that human engagement and response feedback loop. Without it, I just question or wonder how effective that will really be.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. It's a very interesting, like you said, ever changing. I'm sure in a few weeks something else will come out or something will change about this or DeepSeek or ChatGPT. Something will change about some of them, and we'll have to talk about that then.
Yeah. Maybe once we have like some sort of AI, autonomous AI agent that could host this podcast for us, that'd be kind of cool too. You just sort of feed it like, hey, go talk about this and that, make it look like Darian and Eric, and we just let it go, and then it makes our jobs way easier.
I don't know if we want that, honestly. At least I don't know if I do.
I know. Well, for me, I'll be much better looking with the AI bot that I choose. But yeah, but that's just a personal vanity sort of thing, unrelated to technology. Good stuff. Well, yeah, were there other thoughts or other questions you had on the AI side of things?
No, I don't think so. I'm ready to jump into this conversation with Scott, though. I'm excited for it.
Yes, and we'll probably talk about AI a little bit, but the focus with Scott's going to be more on the business process optimization side. And what I love about having Scott on the show is not only is he a client of Third Stage, but he is a business process guy. He's not a tech guy. And he's also going through his first ERP implementation. So he has a really unique perspective, and that's why I wanted him on the show. He's sort of like in the line of fire on the battlefront right now with our team going through their transformation. And I want to dive into how he's treating business process management and process optimization and some of his viewpoints around how to handle current state, future state. How do you handle optimization? How do you handle standardization? How do you reconcile between things you're doing really well today versus limitations of the new system you're rolling out? All that stuff is the kind of stuff I want to get into. So we'll have him on the show here in just a second to dive into that in more detail. And then after Scott's on the show later in this episode, we're also going to talk about why business process standardization is such a pain in the butt and why it's so difficult and why so many companies fail in their standardization efforts. So it's kind of a nice segue from talking to Scott about process management to also getting into the whole challenge of standardization, which I imagine a lot of you listening are thinking about technology rollouts or deployments in the context of how do we standardize our operations. So you won't want to miss that. So we've got a lot more to cover here in episode 213 of Transformation Ground Control. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more, so stay tuned.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 213. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Victaulic. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com, and you can also find past episodes of the show at transformationgroundcontrol.com as well. I'm excited for our next guest. It's the first time he's been on the show. He's someone that I've gotten to know over the last year or more. He's been a client of ours for a while now, and he's heading up an ERP implementation at a company called Victaulic. And the reason why I wanted to have him on the show is not only because he's a great guy, not only because he's a client, and not only because he's leading up an ERP implementation, but perhaps even more importantly, I wanted to have him on the show because he's a business process guy leading an ERP project. And so I want to get his perspective on how to address business process management and optimization and all that good stuff as it relates to ERP implementations. I want to get his sort of real world frontline experience as he's going through this project right now and as we're going through this project right now with his team. So with that all being said, Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah, great to have you, and appreciate you being here. Before we jump in, I'd love to hear what's a little bit about your background and what it is you do at Victaulic and sort of how you grew up in this space.
Sure. Well, my growth in this space has been very recent. I've been with Victaulic for 19 years and came up through an operations background. I was a plant manager, eventually became director of operations, oversaw several facilities within our organization, spent some time in global materials management. And then about 7 months ago, the executive team came to me and said, "Hey, we'd really like to have you head up this effort in our ERP transformation." And so I've shifted over now into completely new ground for me. I've been on the project now about 9 months, and this is my first ERP implementation. So I'm learning as I go, but we've got a great team around us, including Third Stage, to help guide us through and make sure that we make the right decisions, do the right things with our selection processes and our business processes and how we shape that into our final solution. And I work for Victaulic. We're a global leader in mechanical pipe joining solutions. Our company goes back to 1919 with our first patent, when they decided that it was very quick and safe to join pipe together with couplings instead of welding. We now have over 4,000 patents around the world. We sell in 140 countries. Our corporate headquarters is in Easton, Pennsylvania, which is where I am located. And we've got over 50 facilities and 7 foundries around the world. And now we're about 5,500 total employees.
Great. Lots of growth and lots of success in that space. Super interesting. I've got to ask you though, you said that you were asked to be part of this project. Did you volunteer? Did you want to do it? You said this is your first ERP implementation. So what were your thoughts? How did that all transpire? And what were your thoughts when you were asked to be part of the project?
It's that's a great question. Mixed feelings. I don't like to venture into things that I'm not very good at, like most people, I think. Right. And so there was some uneasiness, but I have a fantastic executive team and supportive bosses that said, the fact that you don't have an IT background and you come from the business is exactly why we want you running this program. Like a lot of companies, we tried before and had some struggles, and we didn't quite get off the ground like we wanted to. And so as we kind of reset and took another swing at this, they wanted to have a different perspective, kind of leading the ship. And so, when they come to you with an opportunity, I try and tell most of the people that I mentor in their careers, the default answer is yes.
Right.
And then figure out how to do it. Figure out how to learn the skills that you need. They see something in you that you may or may not see, and so I try to take my own advice there, and
Just jump in.
my default answer was yes. Give it a
Yeah.
shot.
Yeah, just jump in and embrace it, and I imagine it's a good learning experience too. Is it a
It is
lot different than the work you've done in the past?
incredibly,
Yeah.
yeah. It's very different. Although again, we are really taking a look at our business processes, how we do things. We pride ourselves over many years of lean manufacturing and focusing on continuous improvement. So that's kind of ingrained in our company, and it's in all of our blood. And so kind of transitioning that over to, business process optimization and how you incorporate that into your ERP system. And I think there is a nice fit there that they do go well together.
Right. Yeah. And they should go well together. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's what we'll talk about today is just how to better integrate those two kind of different but overlapping work streams. Before we get to some of the questions I have, though, I want to just turn to the audience real quickly. I want to say hello to Darian, who's joining us from LinkedIn here today. Good morning. Fata is joining us from Toronto on LinkedIn. Thank you for being here. And we also have Prashant joining from Delhi, India. Thank you for being here today. And if you don't mind, the rest of you drop in the chat what city and country you're joining from today. And any questions you have along the way, please drop them in the chat. And in fact, I have a question for the audience just to get started as I ask Scott the next question here that I have for him. But I'd love to hear from the audience sort of what you think about business processes and sort of your general headline summary of how business process management should fit into ERP implementations or digital transformations. I'd love to hear any feedback you have from the audience here listening. So please drop that in chat and we'll pull up some of those comments here in just a moment. But while we're waiting for the audience to answer that question, Scott, why, just to start and set the context here, why is business process management so important in this project? Or first of all, I'm making an assumption there. I'm making an assumption that it is important. So let me back up and just ask, is it important? If so, why?
Yeah, I think it's critically important. I think it's important to make sure that your ERP system is aligning with your organization's workflows and really your business objectives. Are you a growing company, and do you need an ERP system that's going to support that? Are you focused really on low cost and high efficiency, and maybe your processes are going to be shaped a little different there? But as I said before, one of the nice things about where I work is we have spent decades working on process optimization and efficiency. It's ingrained in us from day one with the company, and so really driving the most efficient way to do things, whether it's through our manufacturing process or our business processes. We have groups within our organization that go out and focus on that and help all of our different groups within our organization be leaner, meaner, more efficient, get more done with fewer people. And so that's it for us. It was a great benefit to have that already as we started looking at how do we get on a new ERP system, and what of those efficient processes can be brought forward, and also which of them really don't align with a new cloud-based standard ERP system. We have very heavily customized traditional systems within our company that have helped drive a lot of that efficiency. We built them to be efficient. And so really getting, the organization around taking a look at those business processes and determining how do you transfer that forward into a new system where you really don't want to have heavy customization. And, that's been one of our big challenges for us. But that's why it's so important as you're picking the right ERP system and making sure that you're aligned with your business goals, and having your processes to support that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's easy for us to think as, change practitioners or project managers of these projects. It's easy to think that, well, why worry too much about the business processes because the software will sort of dictate that to us. Have you come across that, or what are your thoughts on that school of thought that just defer to your software to help you define what those processes are going to be?
Yeah, we have. And I'll admit that creates quite a bit of conflict for us because our processes in a heavily customized system are incredibly efficient and lean. And when you're going to a standardized system, you really have to take a look at, okay, which of these processes work in this new system and which ones do we really need to change? And even if we have to give up a tiny bit of efficiency for the larger gain for the organization to get on a new platform, that's really some of the decision making that we're having to do, and really accepting standardization versus the heavy customization that we're used to that have helped drive a lot of our processes to date.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the conflict that I have found in our group. You know, I see both sides of it. Again, I came up in a factory where efficiency was everything. You wanted everything to be as lean as it could possibly be. And so to tell somebody, well, I need you to give up a little bit there, and these steps are going to be a little more manual. But when you look at the big picture, we're far better off as an organization being on this new platform.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the struggles that we're seeing right now as we make our journey.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned how you're already a lean operation, and a lot of clients we work with are implementing ERP to help them become more lean, or because they're not lean and they're hoping that ERP will help them do that. How do you navigate that conflict, or have you run into conflicts where the standard process out of the box is actually less efficient or not as lean as you're used to operating because you have a custom environment? Have you run into that? And if so, how have you navigated that?
We have, and I'm curious to hear what the audience says for that, because I can't say we've always navigated it perfectly, but we kind of take a look at the benefits of standardization versus the cost and impact of a customization. And sometimes the customization is really what we found. We can't do everything in our ERP, so we're going to go out and look for another platform that can integrate into it, and that's how we've solved some of that. So the whole front end of our business we find is not really well done in an ERP system, so we want to find somebody outside that does that much better. And so now our processes align better with what they bring to the table. So that's one option that we've kind of pursued. But we are genuinely trying to avoid any customization of the ERP at all costs. Configure where you have to, but only customize when there's no alternative. And we're still early enough in the process where we've not had to make those hard, firm decisions yet on the customization. But that is a struggle for us, where we know that we're very efficient and we don't want to give that up. So we're trying to find ways to kind of meet in the middle, and again, without customizing the platform.
Yeah, that's good sound advice, and kind of walking that fine line between recognizing the strengths and the operational capabilities of the company that you don't want to lose, but also recognizing that there are possibilities to either improve by adapting to the system or finding a system that can bolt on that can fit that better.
Yeah, very much. It's important, I think, for every organization to find and know their special sauce. What is it you do really, really well, and what drives your uniqueness in the marketplace? And don't give those things up.
Right.
But if it is something that, if it's keystrokes and efficiency gains there that we could give up a little bit and not impact, what's special about us, that's really where you make those sacrifices. Knowing the difference between the two, it's not always easy.
Yeah. And it's probably not always cut and dry. And I imagine there's probably some politics and biases and just fear of change that sort of gets wrapped up in that decision too.
Yeah.
Have you seen that
absolutely. Well? I think fear of change is a big one. And I think that's why your change management is so crucial, getting people's heads around the fact that we must change and why, not just that we need to, but why. What is on the other side of this for me as an individual, as a group within the organization, really showing each of them what the benefits are when we get there, even if you have to give up a little bit in the meantime, it's worth it. And having a big picture mindset, it's easy for people that sit in the C-suite to have a big picture mindset, but when you're in the fight every day and doing these functions every day, it's hard to have that big picture mindset. We've really got to, as leaders, we've got to train them on that, get them up to speed on this is much bigger than just this. And yes, you may have to make a slight sacrifice, but here's the benefit we all get from it.
Right. Absolutely. Well, speaking of the audience, you mentioned you'd be curious to hear from the audience. I want to turn to them real quickly here and get to some of the comments. Emil is joining from Toronto, originally from Toronto, but dialing in from Miami, Florida, because Toronto is too cold. Thanks for being honest. Why you're in Florida, and that does sound a lot warmer than Toronto right now. Paris, this is funny. Paris is joining from London. She's interested to learn more about ERP. So I imagine you get a lot of jokes or confusion around whether your name is Paris or whether you're from Paris, but you're actually from London. So thank you for being here today, Paris. We have someone joining from Kelowna, British Columbia, and a couple comments here that people have chimed in on. Actually, let me say hello to someone else joining us from Belgium. So thank you for being here. Sorry, I don't see your name there, but someone is joining us from Belgium. And then here's a couple of comments here I want to get to. Oops, that's my question. We don't need that one. This comment is from Anastasia. Anastasia says BPM should feed into any automation initiative, which I agree. So that's a great comment here. Here's a question from Amy on LinkedIn. It's fairly uncommon for an organization to be as mature as yours in their business process optimization journey. That bodes well for a retrofit to your chosen ERP. For organizations less capable in that area, having a best practice business process set up to start from helps create a solid foundation. What are your thoughts on that? I know, she's sort of saying that maybe you didn't need to do that as much because you're more mature operationally, but have you seen this comment to be true?
Yeah, I do think it's true. But even in a mature organization like ours, our processes, as I said, were really built around, our ERP system was custom built around our processes. And so you're still going to have to do a lot of changes and a lot of optimization to fit those into a new platform, because the new platform is going to operate differently. You don't have all of the customizations that we have grown used to. And so really understanding how our operations can still be done. You still get to the same end goal, but it's maybe different steps to get there. And really educating everybody and training them on those new steps is really where we are in our journey.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Here's a question that's sort of just jumping into the line of fire here, just jumping right into it with the business process management topic. And I'll hide this question here in just a moment so we can see your face again, Scott, but I want to show it to the audience. What do you convince? This is from Emil on LinkedIn. Emil says, what do you do to convince enterprise PMOs to plan for current and future state business process design before onboarding the SI vendor? I'll stop there.
That one's a little tricky for us because as I said, we have an entire organization designed around business process optimization within our existing platform. And so, we really needed to bring on the SI for us to really understand the new processes and what we wanted the new system to be and do, and ingrain it into our North American operations. One thing I didn't mention earlier is we're bringing our North American operations onto a platform that our global operations are already on. And so we have some unique experience there because our global operations are already on the platform. They know the processes. And so what we end up with, and where some of the conflicts lie, is because we're so much more efficient in North America on the existing platform, merging that with a less efficient operation and processes outside the US posed a pretty big challenge as we went about this the first time. And so we're kind of taking a different approach now, bringing North America onto the platform. And then down the road, we're going to worry about the global standardization versus doing that up front, which may seem counterintuitive to a lot of people that do this. But again, because we're coming from two different directions on it, this is what made sense for us to focus on getting on the platform. That will force a lot of standardization. But then once you're all on the platform together, you can really drive global standardization where it's appropriate. Again, our our models are different in different places around the world. How we sell, and so how we process. So we've got to come to grips with that down the road and decide, do we want to standardize those, or do we still want to have unique ways of doing business around the world? And sometimes that does impact your ERP system.
Yeah. Yes. And it's not one size fits all or one answer across the company. I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is there's some instances where one path is better, the better option. There's other parts of the business where it doesn't make sense to standardize.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's an interesting comment that I'd love to get your feedback on. This is actually from Deja. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Deja, who's, by the way, is joining us from Atlanta. So thank you for being here today. And Deja has the question here. Great point here. Great question. Is it worth to make small enhancements or integrations within 1 year leading up to the transformation? Or is it better to wait until the big change and fit into that process? And I'd love to hear your perspective on this, because you're a process guy. You're not an ERP or a tech guy. So you might have a kind of unique perspective here. What are your thoughts to Deja's questions here?
Yeah, my unique perspective is continuous improvement. I think you make all of those small enhancements leading up to it for a number of reasons. Number one, you may think it's 1 year, it may be a little further out, and maybe you missed out on some improvements you could have in the meantime. But even that, 1 year is a long time to give up on an improvement or an enhancement that you could possibly take advantage of. You don't want to invest a lot in. I'm assuming these are different systems that you're trying to integrate within a year. And so, it may be a balancing act there, but I always shy on the side of, let's take advantage of any improvement we can do today, get the benefit of it that we can, and not wait for the big bang and the big change to come, because
right.
You think about it, you're just adding to and making it bigger. You could be taking out some of those, smaller bites now and accomplishing those along the way. And it would also start to ingrain in the organization that, drumbeat of change, that we're going to start that change now. It's going to be little, and then it's going to be more, and then it's going to be more later. But you get them in that mindset of change as early as possible.
Yeah, you bring up an awesome couple of points there. I mean, the summary, or the way I would summarize or add to what you just said, is that the business process piece of it, changing the processes and changing the culture, those two things you mentioned, that's actually the critical path too. That's the stuff that's going to slow you down on a project like this. So even if you're just purely looking at it from a technical project perspective, it's still going to help you, because it's going to not speed things up, but it's not going to slow you down, because you talked about a big change becoming bigger. Well, when that big change becomes bigger, that leads to delays, that leads to resistance to change, it leads to misalignment within the company. There's all these different things that come out at the time of training, or at the time of kind of formally introducing all these new changes. If you do all that stuff a year out and work through all the messiness of that, that's just less you have to deal with when you actually get to that, go live date, or get closer to the go live there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, the challenge is going to be the people, the culture, and the mindset. Our CIO is always quick to remind me, the technology is not going to fail us. We've got to make sure that the people get where they need to be, because that's usually where you fail. And so, we certainly are taking that approach, focusing on the people, focusing on the processes and the mindset around it, and shaping that to accept that change down the road. And as we talked about earlier, that's where the change management really fits in. And it's probably one of the most, if not the most critical aspect of the program.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to come back to change management. Don't worry to the audience here that loves change management. We are going to talk about that. I can't get through a conversation like this without getting more into that. I want to get to a couple questions here. Here's a nice comment. Shawcat on YouTube says, "Hi, Eric, you're doing an amazing job to help businesses in their IT transformation journey. I appreciate the consultation support of Team Third Stage in developing my ERP project. So thank you for your kind words, and I'm glad our team is able to help you, Shawcat." Here's an interesting, this is sort of going back to a point you made a little bit earlier, Scott. This is from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, "You mentioned that avoiding ERP customization is a priority. What are some of the specific areas where you felt the strongest pressure to customize? And how are you evaluating those trade-offs?" And if I could maybe just add maybe another dimension to that, are there certain functions, just at a high level without giving anything too secret away or whatever, are there certain functions or sort of processes or workflows where you felt like those were particularly vulnerable to a mismatch between what you had that was already a strong process versus what an ERP system might fall short on?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, good morning, Darian. I appreciate the question. Yeah, I would say for us, it's really around the front end of our business, the way we take in orders and process orders and manage those orders. We have, like I said, a pretty heavily customized, incredibly efficient way of doing that today. And what you find is that that's not really the specialty of a lot of ERPs. And so, that's where a lot of the struggle has been and the pressure has been to customize, because again, a tremendous amount of efficiency gains between our different operations, and those that are using these existing tools versus those that are already on the platform. And so we're having to really come up with, how do we want to handle that without customizing the ERP system? That, again, we're not doing it. It's forbidden. We're not touching the core process there. And so looking at other alternatives outside of the ERP that integrate well and give you back most, if not all, of those efficiency gains. And there are, wonderful platforms out there that do order management systems and e-commerce very well. And so evaluating which of those is right for us is really what we're working through. And that's kind of where the challenge has been. But again, these are great challenges. I'm really happy that we have such efficient processes and people that want to fight for those processes, because they built them over many years. And that's how our organization has got to where it is today. And in order to make that step into the future and be able to scale up our business to grow even more, we need to get on a new platform, and we need to get on platforms that are going to support that. And so,
Yeah,
that's kind of where we are right now in that journey.
right. Now, what about, we touched on this a little bit, but I want to go a little deeper here on looking at, let's talk about current state versus future state.
Sure.
How much time, what advice would you give to someone trying to figure out how much time should I spend on current state? Should I spend any time on current state? Should I worry about current state? Should I just focus on future state? How do you navigate that balance? We talked about the balance between standardizing and adjusting to the ERP software versus the way your processes were. But if we set that aside and shift gears and look at just current and future state in general, what's your advice to companies trying to figure out how to address those two different parts of business processes?
Yeah, no, and my answer is, it's critically important to know your current state. And whether you work in an organization that is constantly reviewing that, again, I would put us in that category where it's always being looked at, always being reviewed, and trying to find ways to do it better and more efficiently. Or whether you're an organization that really, I don't know, we have a process, we've been running it that way for years. It's important to know what your process is, what your steps are, and ultimately what your business requirements are for a new system. So that's really why it's important to have that current state thoroughly understood. Whether you do that through mapping or whether you do that through other ways, can be different for the business. But knowing what those steps are, and the easiest way is through mapping, but knowing what your processes are in your system today will help drive what you want them to be in the future, and finding areas in there where you maybe have bottlenecks, or maybe have, some challenges along the way that you can address as you're transforming into a new system. Knowing where they are and being able to go after them, I think, is critical for being more efficient on the other side of it. And so again, building your future state around where those bottlenecks are and addressing them, but also what your company's business goals are and business objectives are. So it is critically important to see that current and future state, both.
I'm here with Scott Adams from Victaulic. We're here talking about business process management in ERP implementations. We've got a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients, our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well. So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, a ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 213. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. We cover everything related to digital transformation, including people, process, technology, and strategy. And the show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group and produced by Major Tom Productions. We're here with Scott Adams from a company called Victaulic, which is a client of ours at Third Stage, and we're talking about business process management within ERP implementations. You know, in my experience, I'm curious to hear what you think, if this resonates or if you have a different perspective. But it seems as though with a lot of clients, by looking at the current state, there's some unintended secondary benefits of doing that. I mean, one is that from a change management perspective, you're able to better plot out or map how people's jobs are changing, and you're able to help them more effectively through the change journey if you know where they're starting from. If you don't know where they're starting from or you don't fully understand the current state, you can't just throw out the future state and expect that people are going to somehow understand that if you repeat it enough. They need to understand how it relates to what they do today, first of all. And then second of all, just by asking people how they do things today, I feel like it's almost like not therapy necessarily. Maybe it is organizational therapy. It's like you're listening and understanding how they've built these robust, complex, convoluted processes because they didn't have good tools to work with. And understanding that goes a long way from a change management perspective, because people now feel like, okay, Scott understands. He's not just the process guy coming in to tell me how I have to change everything or throw everything out the window. He actually understands. He asked me how I do things today, whatever. It may still change. It probably is still going to change, but at least he understands now where I'm starting from. Have you seen that to be true, or have you seen that phenomenon?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think not also just that you care enough to ask them what their process is, and now they feel engaged in the program. You know, if you didn't do that and you're just working on the future state and you're not pulling them in, they're going to feel less inclined to buy into it. Where if they felt like they were part of the initial and they were part of mapping out your current state, and then bring them in and part of mapping out your future state, understanding where their challenges are, I think it's a huge help for change management and getting that buy-in with them. Absolutely.
Yeah. Great point. Here's a couple other comments I want to get to. This is from Emil on LinkedIn. Says, unfortunately, too many organizations try to cut corners on projects by skipping the current state analysis work. It's often seen as a nice to have instead of a risk mitigation tool. And I would add to that, I think we've worked with a lot of clients where executives, especially at the executive level, will say, let's not bother with current state. Why are we even bothering with that? We know it's going to change. We know it sucks. We know the current systems suck. Let's just ignore that and let's focus on the future state. And I understand why you'd want to think that way. It's sort of human nature. Let's not worry about the past. Let's worry about the future. And that's what good leaders do. But, for all the reasons we just talked about, that current state has a lot of value that I think goes overlooked. Now, you don't want to get too caught up in analysis paralysis and, mapping out to the nth degree all the granular details of how your current processes are working. That's not going to be productive. And that's probably a point of diminishing return. But just understanding at least the macro level, how things work, what tools are being used, why you're doing things the way they are, what the strengths are of what you're doing today, so you don't lose that. All that stuff really important in the current state.
I think exactly that. Knowing where your strengths are, knowing where your bottlenecks are, being able to carry some of them forward and being able to address the bottlenecks, I think is the key. And if you don't know where those are in your process, I don't know how you develop a future state effectively.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with that. Here's another comment from Amy. Amy says, I always said that being a successful PM includes therapizing the stakeholders and users. I'm going to steal that word.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
But then she has a follow-up question here, again, from Amy on LinkedIn. Thank you for all the great questions, Amy, by the way. Amy's interested to know how the SI structured the SOW for your project to factor in the current to future state. Did they go for granular, specific, or low detail with open-ended requirement specs? So maybe just more generally, how did the SI or the technical partners you're working with, how did they view current state? Did they care about current state? Did they build that into their plan? How did you?
I would say they were probably less concerned about it than we wanted. And we kind of have had to bring them along in that. Again, us being a unique organization where part of it was already on the platform, I think they came in with a very simple mindset of, listen, I just need to get you on the same platform they're on. And, our business function said, whoa, hold on. We do things very differently here for very specific reasons. And here's the efficiency and the benefits of doing this. And so that really posed some of the challenges between a current state and a future state for us. And I would say we're still working through those today. I wouldn't say we have them all resolved. But yeah, I think that because of the uniqueness of our situation where we were already on the platform, it kind of came in with a mindset of, I don't really care what your future state is. You're already halfway on or where your current state is. You're already halfway in the future state. Let's just get the rest of you there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Really interesting. Let's see. So I want to shift gears and come back to change management for a second, or maybe a few seconds, because this is always an interesting angle to come at. But when you're looking at change management, I mean, just at a high level, I know this is a really broad question, but just as a starting point or as sort of a headline level, how do you view change management in these sorts of projects and enabling process changes as well as just fitting into the overall transformation project?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest things are just keeping everyone aligned. And whether that's through just communication, I think that's the biggest part of the change management for me, is making sure everybody understands where we're headed, has a constant stream of communication, feels that it's a dialogue and not just one way. They feel they can ask their questions, get thorough answers. I think having that alignment with the company's goals and objectives and making sure everyone on the project understands those. And then you get into training and making sure that people understand the new platform, working with the SI for that training. And how do we not only get the project team on it, but then long-term, how do we train the entire organization? We're not there yet, but that is a big question I have of how we're going to do that. We have, a couple thousand people on this system globally, and we've got to have that training rolled out for what we're going to do differently here in North America, as well as some of the changes they may see globally with what we're doing. So those are the biggest things for me, is just keeping everybody on board, keeping everybody rowing in the same direction, I guess.
Yeah. Did you have much sort of cross-functional collaboration, or do you have much cross-functional collaboration, or how did you build that into
Yeah,
the
we do,
project
and
as far
I
as getting
think
people involved?
it's been easy for us to build that in because we started with a cross-functional executive steering committee. And so having that in place to really force where needed the organization to adopt what we're trying to do here. And again, cross-functionally is the key. Um, so the entire team is very cross-functional and working very well together on, really lining out your entire end-to-end process and knowing your part in it, but how that affects the entire process end to end. And so, yeah, for us, it's been great having that cross-functional steering committee. They've spoken to the team several times. They've done videos for the organization. They really do push that forward to make sure everybody understands we're all in this. It doesn't matter if you're in sales or operations. We're all on this project together, and we're all working together for one common solution. And then, like I said, as we get
Right.
into those end-to-end processes, it's a lot easier to have those conversations because they know far up the food chain, they support this and they know that we need to work together on it.
Yeah. So did you have, despite that sort of framework and that approach to change, which I think is very effective, do you still have resistance to change? Or are you still seeing little pockets of resistance throughout the organization or certain functions or departments, or
Yeah, there
how would you
there
describe
are
that?
still, I don't know that I want to call them resistance to change at this point. There's uncertainty because we
Right.
haven't defined what all of our future processes are going to be quite yet. And so those that have worked very hard to bring lots of efficiency to bear, there's uncertainty as to what it's going to be. And there's uncertainty as to, do I really need to give this up for the greater good? So I'd say we're at that stage. There is some resistance, but again, I think it's more wrapped up around, I don't mind doing things differently. I just don't want to do them inefficiently. And so if we
Right.
can get to the same endpoint and not have to increase headcount in an area, then I'm good with it. I'm not resistant to the change. If you tell me in order to get to that same endpoint, I got to add 20% to my headcount, that's where I'm going to start pushing back on you. And I think those are fair. Those are legitimate concerns. And again, coming from an operations background, that's near and dear to my heart. And I understand and am doing everything I can to help those groups get what they're looking for without a heavy customization and finding that somewhere in the middle that we can meet.
Right. Right. Here's an interesting question from Darian again on LinkedIn. Darian says, as you move towards your future state, how are you ensuring that decisions made today won't create roadblocks for scalability down the line? So in other words, rather than just looking at what's the optimal current state for us today, how do you think beyond that and think, well, what about 5 or 10 years from now? What kind of process do we need to put in place now to prepare for that scale and growth later
Yeah,
on?
and I think that goes to our core principle of not customizing. We want to take advantage of upgrades, of changes in technology. I say to a lot of people, and you're much more aware of this than I am. As a society, we're at the precipice of major change in AI driving this entire industry. And so I
Mhm.
use this example with everyone. Everywhere you customize or you build something internally, you're giving that up because you're not going to be able to drive those changes internally where you're partnering with a major corporation that does this, and they have entire groups in their organization driving AI and putting that change out through future upgrades. And we want to take advantage of that. We want to ride that wave. And so that's really a huge thing for me for why we don't want to customize anything today so we don't regret it later. I want to be open to every single possibility in the future that I can take advantage of through, incredible technology advancements. So that's kind of our guiding light as we head through the project to do that and eliminate those roadblocks down the road.
Right. Makes sense. Here's a comment or a question from Rodrigo on LinkedIn. I'll try to summarize it. It's a long question here, but I'll try to summarize what I think he's trying to get at here. Essentially, he's asking whether agile waterfall or a hybrid approach is appropriate given the long-term strategic impact of ERP implementations. Is that something you were involved with, or if so, how did you guys navigate deciding whether you do more of a traditional waterfall approach, which is more the sequential stage gate based approach to ERP implementations, which is kind of the historic way of implementing ERP systems, versus agile, which is more, incremental changes and rolling out, getting technology out faster and incrementally improving. And I know you guys mentioned continuous improvement is a big thing to you guys, Scott. So you may already have an agile sort of mentality within the organization, or is a hybrid between the two most appropriate? Is that something you were involved with making decisions on, or how did you guys navigate?
Yeah, I can't say
overall?
that I am, but I would, given those descriptions, I would say we're definitely much more waterfall. We're not releasing things between now and then. We've got a go live date that we're shooting for, that we bring everything to bear at one time. But certainly getting things integrated, testing them along the way, making sure that everything is functioning properly and doing exactly what we need it to be. But yeah, I would say waterfall is our approach.
Yeah. I think for a company like yours and what you're trying to accomplish, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of organizations get enamored by agile, thinking like, oh, agile's faster and it's less cumbersome than a waterfall approach, and we get more immediate value. And some of that can be true at times, but the problem is you end up sort of gravity pulls you back to the way things are right now, when you take that agile approach, because you are moving so fast and you're not taking that time up front to get that alignment and really slowing things down. I don't mean slow it down in a bad way, but you sort of have to slow things down to make sure you do get that alignment and that clarity on what you want and work through all that stuff, then deploy the technology that fits.
Yeah. And we're going through such a huge change from our existing platform to a new platform that I think we would struggle along the way if we tried to release things without having our customers visible to it, internal and external. We want to have smooth processes, and we want this to be blind to everybody involved. So I think we would struggle along the way because it's such a major change.
Yeah. What about user adoption and engagement? I know we've been talking a little bit about change management in general, and how to involve people and how to prevent that potential resistance to change as much as you can. But what about further down the line when you get to user adoption? And I know, based on where you guys are in the project, that you may not know as much about this yet, or you may not have as many lessons in this phase yet. But what have some of your early lessons been as it relates to what you guys are going to need to do to ensure you get that user adoption engagement with those new processes and the new tool sets you're rolling out?
I think it's safe to say we're not quite there yet, but some of the things that I will be looking for as we get into that is, really showing everybody what the long-term benefits are, not only to them, but to the corporation, and really making sure that we do very good training. We don't want anybody to feel like, I'm not ready for this change. I want everyone in the organization to feel, very fluent in a new system before we turn it on. And then really supporting them after the go live and being able to walk them through challenges that are going to happen, and being ready for some loss of efficiency just because you're on a new system that's going to quickly come back as people, get used to it and get up to speed, versus efficiency losses that maybe because you're doing it differently now and it is slower, knowing the difference and being able to react appropriately to each one. But we don't want anybody on the other side to feel like, wow, I used to be able to do this in a minute. Now it takes 4, and I don't know how I'm going to do this. We want to make sure that that's all thoroughly vetted and everybody's on the same page, and we've done everything we can to make it as efficient as possible when it gets turned over to them. And we want the best training that they can get before we release them.
Right. What about some of the process owners within Victaulic? Some of the process owners, the subject matter experts, how did you involve them, or how have you involved them in the process of defining current state, future state, and just being involved in the ERP project in general?
Yeah, very much so. We identified global process owners for every one of our work streams. They are actively engaged in the project, and ultimately they have a lot of say in the processes and the process changes that are made within their work stream. We truly do treat them like a global process owner. And so, engaging them, having them with full input into the changes, making sure they understand why we need to make this change, and getting their buy-in so that they can support it down through their organization has been critical for us. But they're absolutely a core part of the team. And then bringing in the subject matter experts that know all of the nitty-gritty details, and being able to explain, this is why we do this today in these 12 steps, is very beneficial for us defining how we want to do it in the future, knowing why those 12 steps were put in place. It wasn't by accident. And so they've been a critical bridge for our knowledge base between our current state and our future state. And so, yeah, we've had a pretty large team. Every work stream has global process owners, work stream leads, subject matter experts that are all working together, and then cross-functionally to really define what these processes are going to be.
Yeah. I'll echo what I think it was Amy on LinkedIn, or and if it wasn't Amy, it was someone on LinkedIn mentioned a few minutes ago. They made the comment that you guys are a more mature organization in many ways when it comes to process management, and just the fact that you're in the role you're in, and you have such a prominent role on the project, on a technical project, sort of demonstrates, or sort of illustrates how Victaulic views business processes as being so important. But despite the fact that you guys are so mature in the business process arena, what are some of the most common pitfalls, or have you guys run into any pitfalls when managing business processes as it relates to this? Or what are some of the challenges been trying to manage that transition from current state to future state and optimization? And all that stuff?
And I would say, back to what we've been discussing, the biggest thing for us is, knowing how efficient we are and not wanting to give that up, and being able to create new processes or find new solutions that help us bring that efficiency forward. That's by far been our number one challenge. And so working around that, having those teams engaged, but having them be open-minded. Look, I do it this way today and it's very efficient. I don't want to do it that way because this is the way we do it. Okay, well, the system requires this. And, being able to kind of work through that discussion and those, conversations to get to what we can do, maybe through some slight configuration, or, bringing in certain aspects of the core platform to do things differently, versus how you do it today in your heavily customized platform. That's been the biggest challenge for us so far, is our moving off of and changing that mindset from our heavily customized, internally developed platform.
Yeah. I could see an organization like yours that has that maturity and that focus on process optimization, even outside of this project, even well before this project ever started. I could see that being a strength, but I could also see it having a dark side too, to where there's sort of a perception that, hey, we are lean, we are mature in our business processes, we have optimized our processes. This software over here is not optimized. The software is not. And in some cases that may be true, but there may be other cases where, well, okay, maybe that's not true, or maybe there is a way to reconcile the two more so than, the average process person might think. Have you seen that?
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing, you get into finance, purchasing, a lot of things that are just standard. There's no challenges there. You're going to adopt it. It's going to run the same way. Very standardized processes like that. Ours really has been around, again, what I would call our secret sauce. The way we handle orders differently is where we have focused years of lean and process improvement. And so those become our biggest hurdles to move forward. But we're making great progress. And I think you got to get creative. You got to find the right solutions. You got to get people's buy-in that we're going to have to give up a little bit, but teach them what the broader goal is, and we're going to get there. But yeah, there've been some challenges along the way with that.
Right. So looking forward, then, when we look at AI and just the advancements in automation and technology in general, how do you see the discipline of business process management function changing? Did you see your job changing, or how do you see your job changing in your field of work changing as a result of AI and other emerging technologies?
I think it's going to bring automation to bear and do things much faster. I think getting critical data points on your current process and understanding where the bottlenecks are simpler, being able to leverage that technology to point you where you should be focusing your efforts on improvement, I think is where it brings the most benefit. Certainly automating processes is great. Being able to, scan documents right in to become an order has been already a big improvement for us. But I think as we look forward, I really do think it's going to be analyzing your processes at a level and at a speed that is really hard to comprehend today. And so that'll help a lot on the current state mapping and understanding, again, where are the things that are running really well, where are the bottlenecks, and being able to attack the right things. I think that's where AI is going to make the biggest difference around business process management.
Right. Now, what about those listening right now and watching right now that are going through an ERP implementation? Maybe they've thought about business processes, maybe they haven't. But what sort of advice would you give? Kind of closing advice to get. What kind of closing advice would you give people to get started on the journey or to be effective in business process management in particular as it relates to their ERP or digital projects?
I'm sorry, was that for me or for the audience?
No, for you.
I was trying to read some of the comments at that time. You told me I was going to get distracted by the comment.
I did. I warned you. There's a lot of. It's a chatty group, which I like, but it could be distracting.
We'll edit that out earlier. Can you ask that again?
Yeah, I will. That's funny. I always tell people that too. I'm like, don't you can watch the chat go if you want, but it can be distracting, and you fell right into it. You almost made it through though without it. But I was asking, like, what one piece of closing advice would you leave to project team members that are about to go through an implementation, or maybe they're going through it right now? What's the closing advice you'd leave them with on the biggest things they need to know about business process management as it relates to their project?
I think, prioritizing your process alignment over the customization. Again, I've talked about it several times. Knowing where your special sauce is and fighting to retain that, but not clinging on to what can be standardized through a new platform. Don't get hung up on it. We've done it this way for many years, and we know that it's the right way because there's a new future out there. And as I said, if you can get to the same end point, just with different steps along the way, you've still gotten to the same end point. So understand those steps along the way, and how you were doing it may not be the way that works best with your ERP. But if you want to take advantage of future upgrades, of AI advancements, avoid heavily customizing your platform and clinging on to that, because it's just not a good long-term solution for you. And 10 years from now, who can even envision what this space is going to look like with advancements? And if you build your own system and you're still on it 10 years from now, you've missed that entire boat. So that's the biggest thing for me is really understanding what your processes are and standardizing everywhere that you can and customizing only where absolutely necessary.
Yeah, it's great advice. And really appreciate you coming on here today, Scott, to talk about your experience, especially given the fact that you're not a traditional tech ERP guy. It's good to hear your perspective coming at it more from the business and the operational side of things. I love that perspective and really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a great conversation, and thank you to the audience. Great questions. I appreciate it.
Yeah, perfect. To echo that, thank you to the audience. Really good questions here, and hopefully you found this helpful. And there's so much more we could talk about, whether it's around change management or implementation strategies. I mean, there's so much we didn't get to, but this is a great start to a conversation around that. How can people learn more about Victaulic, and how can they connect with you?
Yeah,
Scott?
Victaulic.com is the best way. Again, we're a private company, and we're really proud of our longevity and our growth. It's a great company to work for, and we're really looking to grow this business into the future and really be able to scale up through our ERP. You can find me on LinkedIn, and happy to consult with anybody there.
Well, thank you again, Scott. Thank you to the audience for the great questions. I really enjoyed having you on the show here today, and we've got a lot more we want to sort of dive into as it relates to business process management and as it relates to that conversation with Scott. But first, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more Transformation Ground
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 213. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. And the show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent and tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And I'm the CEO of that company too, not coincidentally, by the way. Darian, we just had Scott on the show, a client of ours at Victaulic. We talked about business process management, a lot of good stuff, a lot of great questions from the audience, including you. You had some great questions as we were going through that interview live. But what were some of your thoughts and follow-up takeaways from that conversation?
Yeah, Eric, I think there was a lot of great points in that conversation. Lots of great questions from the audience, like you said. But one thing that really stood out to me was, or I guess one thing that you guys, kept coming back to, it felt like, was the cross-functional collaboration, having like that steering committee in place, but then making sure everybody's on the same page. From your experience, what are the biggest challenges in actually getting leadership and different departments to stay aligned throughout an ERP project? I guess it's like one thing to have everyone in the room at the start, but how do you keep them engaged all the way through a project that could go for years? So how do you keep them engaged?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a balancing act too, because the more people you engage, the more of a democracy you're creating, if that makes sense. I mean, I'm not saying that in a good or bad way, but more of you're sort of creating this expectation that, if whether I involve 20 or 1,000 people in this project, those 20 or 1,000 people are all going to have their own opinions and feedback and whatever. And that's good, because you want to listen, you want to gather feedback from as many people as you can. You want to get as much understanding as you can about current state and some of the challenges of moving to the future state, et cetera. But the more voices you get involved, the more it just slows things down. And so it is definitely a balancing act. But I'd say most of our clients that we work with and most organizations we see in the space tend to err too far on the side of not enough involvement. They think they're involving people, or they intend to, early on. But what happens is you go through these projects and you start to get so heads down focused on all the crap you have to deal with during these projects. I mean, there's so many moving parts and issues and risks and firefighting that comes up, that you end up forgetting to look outside and bring more people into the conversation and get them involved. So having said that, though, you can't involve everyone, and you can't involve everyone for a long time, because they don't have time to be involved a ton. So you've got to be real deliberate and careful and focused in how you involve people. And so generally what we see work really well is you sort of have 3 different tiers of people's involvement. You have the core project team, which is generally the, kind of a collective group of, whatever it is, 7 to 10 people maybe, that understand at a high level the entire operations of the business. They sort of represent different parts of the business and different stakeholders throughout the entire organization. And they're the people that are really heavily involved in the project day to day, week to week or whatever. But that's a pretty small group. You need, to your point, how do you involve people beyond those 7 or 10 project team members, the core project team members? So what we often see is the second tier, which is the business process owners. And you bring in these business process leaders or owners from different departments, different locations, and you involve them at key touch points throughout the project, whether it's defining the current state, defining the future state, identifying where the improvements should be, validating business requirements, validating the user acceptance testing, being involved in training down the line. That's where the business process owners fit, but they're not usually involved in the project full time. It's a part-time role. And when they're involved in a very targeted, focused way. And then subject matter experts would be sort of the third tier, which is that's probably the biggest group of people you're going to touch, but it's a big group of people that you're touching less, over time. So they might only get involved in the validation of future state processes, for example, or they may not be the actual trainers, but they're the ones that are going to get the first round of training, before the rest of the organization does. So, their role is a little bit lower on a per person basis, but there's more of them involved, and their involvement has to be super targeted as well, because usually the subject matter experts are less focused on end-to-end processes. Like the process owners usually are more focused on end-to-end workflows, whereas subject matter experts are sort of deeper. They're experts within their unique domain, like an accounts payable clerk, for example. That's very specific. You might have the accounting and finance process lead that's involved as a process owner, but then you might have an accounts payable clerk that is there just to represent accounts payable and make sure that those interests are, those interests are represented in the overall project. So those are generally the way we typically see those 3 tiers play out in these sorts of projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And another really relevant topic during this conversation was about scalability and future proofing. You guys were really big on, avoiding heavy customization. And Scott, I think, alluded to this, so they wouldn't box themselves out of future updates and AI advancements. I know you've seen a lot of companies struggle with this, but what are some examples of businesses that have over customized and later regretted it? And where do you think the line is between using out of box functionality and keeping your so-called secret special sauce?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, there's a lot to it. I mean, it starts with choosing the right software and making sure you have a clear understanding of what your needs are, so that you can find the software that best fits your organization. I think software evaluation and selection is less important now than it was 10 or 20 years ago. I don't mean it's less important, but I mean the the level of detail and concern you should have around choosing the right software is probably a lot lower now than it used to be, partially because there's so many ERP systems out there that have become very robust and flexible, and they have, there's expansive capabilities and a lot of different options. So it's important, but not as important as it used to be, but it's still important, right? You don't want to choose a software that can't handle basic things that you need. For example, if you're a complex engineer to order manufacturing company, and you implement a system that can't take CAD drawings and convert it into a bill of materials, that's a big deal. That's probably tells you you've got the wrong software, and you should probably go find a system that can integrate CAD drawings with a bill of materials and automatically generating that bill of materials. So that's just one, of many, many examples I could come up with, but that's what you have to do, is make sure you've got the right system in place, or you've chosen the right system. And then once you've chosen the right system, then, of course, you've got to make sure that you are navigating that tricky part of the decision that we talked about with Scott around, what is it that we do well that we know we want to preserve no matter what, even if the new software can't handle it that way, and we're willing to change the software to fit that, versus, yeah, we don't really need to do things that way. We could adapt to the way the software works out of the box. So let's change and bend our processes to fit that rather than the other way around. Usually every organization has decisions that fall into both buckets, but too many organizations think it's either or, all or nothing. Either I'm going to use the software completely off the shelf, no customization. I may hear it all the time from executives. They say it all the time. No customization. We're going to implement this out of the box, clean core, or whatever you want to call it. And that's a noble goal to set, but you're not going to achieve it just because it's impossible, especially the larger, more complex and more diversified your company is. You're just simply going to run into problems or mismatches between what the technology can do and what you need to do as a business. So the tricky part, though, is figuring out what is a legitimate, like, you really do need to change the software to fit your business, versus, yeah, that's that part of your organization is just resisting change. There is a way you could do it that's just as good, maybe even better over here in the new software. We just need to bring people along for the ride. So just recognizing that you're going to have processes and areas of your business that fall into both buckets, and then planning for that. I mean, I think too often organizations assume in their implementation assumptions that there's not going to be any customization. And then the minute you do introduce customization into the equation, it ends up delaying the project and adding to your budget and all this stuff. So you have to assume you're going to have some level of customization or some level of mismatch between what you're implementing and what you want. And you've got to factor that in as buffer into your implementation plan and your budget as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But overall, I feel like this was a really great conversation with Scott, and I would love to hear more of the audience thoughts on some of the questions that were asked and asked just recently as well.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the audience's feedback on some of those big hot buttons, around current state versus future state, for example. Which do you think is more important? Do you focus on both or not? Or how do you navigate that decision we just talked about? Standardization and adapting to the software versus not. I'd love to hear your feedback on any of those decision points that we were talking about throughout the interview. So good stuff. And the good news is we're not done talking about business processes yet. We're going to get more into it here in just a second. We're going to talk more about standardization, because I'd say 70, 80, maybe even 90% of the companies we work with across our company, they come to us with a stated objective that they want to standardize their operations. And most of our clients are multinational, high growth organizations that have grown organically and through M&A. And as a result, they end up with disparate processes, disparate systems, disparate data sets, et cetera. And then they decide one day that they either need to or want to upgrade their technology and go through a digital transformation. They contact us and we help them. And when we do start that journey, usually they say, hey, we've just grown through all this, siloed growth over the years, and we want to standardize and bring us all together as one company. And that makes a lot of sense, but there's a lot of risk and a lot of pain that goes along with that. And a lot of people don't understand the magnitude of that pain. So that's exactly what we want to talk about in the next segment here. So we're going to play you this clip of a YouTube video that I recently published about standardization, why it's so difficult, why it so often fails during digital transformation, and what some of those common risk points are. And we're going to roll this clip, and then we'll come back with some additional follow-up and questions. But here's a clip of why standardization so often fails in digital transformations. One of the most common refrains we hear from clients when they first hire us is we want to implement new ERP software, but we want to do it in a way that creates commonality in our business processes, allows us to standardize, and allows us to improve and integrate the way we do business. And on the surface, this makes total sense, and I fully understand and support the idea of using ERP software to drive standardized processes. But the problem is, it's a lot harder than you think, and there's a lot more risk than you think. It's going to increase the amount of time, money, and resources required to make the project successful. And it's also going to increase your risk profile, and perhaps most importantly, it's going to create a lot of heartburn, resistance to change, and chaos within your operations. At the end of the day, standardization isn't just about creating a common set of technologies and tools. It's also about changing well-established business processes that you already have in place. And it also entails changing the way people have done business for a long time. So it's a lot more than just setting up new technology. There's a big impact and a big risk, both operationally and organizationally. So that's what we'll talk about here today, is what the challenges are with standardization and how you can navigate that goal and that vision throughout your ERP implementation.
Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to share a little bit of information about Third Stage Consulting and who we are. Third Stage Consulting Group is an independent, technology agnostic provider of consulting services to help clients through their digital transformations. We help with digital strategy and software selection, as well as implementation planning. And during implementation, we provide services related to program management, organizational change, business process improvement, as well as enterprise architecture. These are just some of the services we provide. We have offices in North America as well as Europe and Asia Pacific. So if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out our resource center, which includes a number of resources that will help you through your digital transformation, and you can access that for free using the QR code here or the links below. You can also reach out to me directly if you'd like to discuss your digital transformation and brainstorm ideas on how to improve where you're headed on your journey. Now let's jump back into today's content.
Let's start off with understanding why organizations typically want to standardize their business processes and to create a common set of business processes and technologies and tool sets. The main reason why organizations typically want to do this is because they've grown a lot over the years. They've acquired other companies, they've entered new markets, they've expanded, they've changed the way they do business. And oftentimes what happens is you get a proliferation of different ways of doing business. One exception becomes 5 exceptions, which becomes 10 or 100 exceptions over time. And so organizations just tend to organically morph into a very disparate set of processes and systems until one day the executive team and others within the organization look up and say, hey, we're doing business 100 different ways. Wouldn't it be great if we could do business one way and one way only? That will create a better customer experience. It'll provide more efficiency and profitability to the company. It'll make the lives easier for our employees because now they aren't trying to guess which process to follow. And ultimately, it allows us to integrate our data and our systems and our overall workflows within technology. So on paper, this sounds great. This is what a lot of organizations want. A final reason why organizations oftentimes want to pursue standardization is because software vendors oftentimes sell standardization as this utopia vision of how things could be with the organization by using their technology. More specifically, software vendors sell this idea of best practices. They claim that their software has best practices that will allow you to do business the same way. Now, this is a topic for a whole nother video, which I have covered on my YouTube channel and other videos, but software best practices simply don't exist. There's the way software works, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's best practice for you as an organization. But regardless, the fact that software vendors are out there selling this concept leads many to believe that standardization is something that's easier than it really is. And if I had to estimate, I'd say probably 80 to 90% of the clients that approach us to hire our team to help with their digital transformation state standardization is one of the key objectives of the project. So it's completely understandable. It's completely common for organizations to want to do this. But the next question I want to answer in this video is, why is it so difficult? Now, we've talked about why organizations prefer to standardize their business processes and their operating model, but let's talk about the downside. What does this do to your organization, and why is it so difficult, and why is it so much easier said than done to standardize your business processes? Well, first of all, let's back up and look at your organization and ask yourself this. How long have you been doing business the way you've been doing it, for the most part? I know it evolves and changes over time, but if you look back 10 or 20 years, how many of those business processes are still in place today? That's one question you have to ask yourself. The other question you have to ask yourself is, why are you doing things the way you're doing them? Can anyone explain that? Now, a lot of times by answering that question, it'll lead you to the conclusion that yes, we need to improve our business processes and we need to have a standard way of doing things because we can't explain why people are doing things a bunch of different ways for a simple or a common business process within our organization. Another question you can ask yourself is how are people going to respond when you tell them that you're going to change their business processes, the way they've been doing things for a long time? And then another question you can ask is how long is the average tenure of your employees? Organizations that have highly tenured employees that have been with the organization for 10, 20, 30 years, those people generally have a harder time changing because the way they do things is so embedded in their DNA and the way they operate day to day that it's just going to be harder to change no matter how well-intentioned those people are. So those are some questions you can ask yourself to understand the difficulty of standardization as well as understanding why you might want to standardize. But if we dive in even further, we can look at some of the reasons why this concept of standardization is so difficult. First of all, change is difficult to begin with. Any organization is going to have trouble changing to some degree, some more than others, but every organization will have that challenge. Second of all, business processes that have percolated and developed over time tend to be pretty well established within the organization, which makes it difficult to change those processes. Another reason is because organizations diversify and grow over time and they end up developing different ways of doing different business processes because they have different customers, they have different product lines, they add new service offerings to the mix, they enter new markets geographically. So there's a lot of different reasons why organizations develop this proliferation of different processes and workflows, leading them to want to swing the pendulum back the other direction, which is let's just standardize everything. But changing those processes is very difficult. And then finally, changing people is very difficult. When you talk about changing a majority of your organization to fit some sort of standard common operating model, that is a huge, massive disruption to people. Not only in terms of how they conduct their business processes, not only in terms of which technologies and tools they use, but also in terms of the way their job is designed. If you think about something like artificial intelligence and using artificial intelligence as part of your standard process and workflow, that's just a big change for people. That's a big new way of thinking that's not going to happen overnight. In fact, you're probably going to implement that new technology a lot faster than you're going to get people to learn how to become comfortable with that technology. So when you look at people, process, and technology, all three of those dimensions are difficult when it comes to standardization. Not impossible, but very difficult. So the next question that I want to answer is, what do we do? How do we navigate the difficulties that I just described? And how do we ensure that our digital strategy takes these risks and challenges into consideration? So now the question becomes, how do we navigate this whole difficulty of standardizing business processes? How do we make sure this doesn't create total chaos within the organization? How do we ensure that we don't disrupt our operations because we're trying too hard to standardize things? This all starts early upfront in your digital strategy and also in terms of your phase 0 implementation planning. So before you ever start deploying new technology and before you start bringing in the technical consultants to start designing and building stuff, we always encourage clients to take time up front to do that phase 0 implementation plan. This is where you can start to do things like segregate your business processes and prioritize your business processes. So in other words, not all business processes need to be standardized. There's some that are more important than others. There's some back office functions, for example, that might make a lot of sense to go through the pain and the difficulty of standardizing because it's worth it. It's worth the efficiency gain you're going to get. You're not losing out on providing a better customer experience to your customers and that sort of thing. And so you might isolate some of your standardization efforts to back office functions that don't touch the customer. On the flip side, there may be some customer-facing processes that you want to have differentiated. You might have different divisions or different locations in your organization where you're going to do things differently because you have a different customer base. You're trying to meet different market demands. You're trying to meet different regulatory requirements. So there might be some forward-facing reason why you wouldn't want to standardize. But regardless, you want to make sure you have clarity before you ever start the implementation on which processes you want to standardize and which ones you don't. And that's a pretty messy process. It takes a lot of time to get through that decision-making process and that alignment process of getting everyone on the same page related to that. And that's why you want to do that during phase 0 before the meter starts running on the really expensive part of the project, which is designing and building software. So it may behoove you to defer the start of your technical work stream until you get through this alignment exercise of making sure that everyone's on the same page with what processes we're going to standardize, which ones we're not, And when it comes to the ones we are going to standardize, what does that standard model look like? And that's a whole nother layer of complexity. Now we've got to agree on what that standard operating model looks like. And you can just imagine if you've got 10 different departments that do things 10 different ways and you're trying to move to one way of doing things, you're probably going to have 9 of the 10 departments that are unhappy with the way things shake out because it's not their way. And so you want to make sure that you take the time to invest in change management, you take the time to add buffer in your plan to account for that decision-making messiness, and you want to make sure you cover all that before you get into the design and build of software. Once you've made the decision of which processes you're going to standardize and how you're going to standardize, now you need to determine how that factors into your implementation plan. If you're doing a ton of standardization and it's going to be a pretty drastic change for your organization, that's a longer timeline, a much longer implementation timeline than the organization that isn't standardizing as much, simply because not standardizing is the path of least resistance, so it's going to take you less time and money. Now, on the flip side, of course, you're not going to get as much business value, most likely, but it will take you less time and money and risk up front. So we need to recognize what the impact is on the overall implementation plan. And then finally, I'd say the executive team and the project team needs to have a strong stomach, because going through the standardization process creates, again, a lot of noise, a lot of chaos, a lot of frustration. And it's easy to resist change when it's disruptive in that way. So we need to make sure that the executives have a strong stomach and can navigate the storm, if you will. And part of that involves investing in change management. Change management becomes even more important when you're standardizing business processes and making that big of a change within your organization. Now, everything I've talked about in this video so far is something that can be addressed and should be addressed during the digital strategy and phase 0 phase of the project. In other words, it's the phase before you begin the technical implementation. And I'm not going to get into it here in this video, but I do have a separate video on my YouTube channel that dives into phase 0 in a lot more detail. You can find that video right here. And in that video, I talk about what phase 0 is and some of the major components that you should consider and ensure you invest in that phase. But be sure to check out that video. I've also included a link below to help you with that. And I've also included a link below to our phase 0 checklist. You can read that on our website. It's free. It's a good way to look at that list of things that you should be doing before you ever start the technical implementation. And many of those things are related to defining your business processes and your level of standardization. So I hope this has provided some context and understanding of the benefits of standardization, the reasons why organizations want to do it, but also what the risks and challenges are, along with how you can navigate some of those challenges and still pursue that state of utopia of common business processes, but do it in a way that's realistic and isn't setting your organization up for failure. Instead, you want to be setting yourself up for success. So that's a clip from my YouTube channel where I talk about standardization, why it's so difficult, why it fails. Darian, what were some of your thoughts or follow-up questions from that video?
Yeah, I mean, right away, I love how you dived into, I guess, what you could say one of the biggest misconceptions about ERP implementations, which is the idea that standardization will automatically lead to efficiency and integration. But you really broke it down in a way that actually standardization can be much more difficult, costly, and risky than organizations anticipate. One question that I have about this is, you mentioned that organizations many of them have fragmented business processes due to growth, acquisitions, and market expansion. At what point do you think the need for standardization becomes unavoidable?
Yeah, I've wondered that too. That's a good question, because I've always wondered, I'll ask clients this a lot. I'll say, why now? Like what all of a sudden led you to believe that now's the time to, go through this transformation when it's not a problem that came up overnight? It's been building up over decades in many cases. And I think what happens is simply a couple things. One is that, a lot of times organizations get to a tipping point where they just can't, they see their growth, accelerating for time, and then it just sort of slows down and they peak. And they realize part of the reason we've peaked and part of the reason we're having trouble continuing to grow is because we haven't standardized some of our operations, and we haven't, put the right centralized tool set in place or whatever. And so they just strategically come to that conclusion based on the pain they're feeling that we can't continue to grow the way we've been doing things. But, I know at third stage, we've grown a lot in 6 years of being a business, and we go through this too. Every couple of years, it feels like we reach a plateau and we have to change things, standardize and bring in more structure and, along with the change management pain that goes along with that. So, I know it on a smaller scale than a lot of our multi-billion-dollar clients, but a lot of these multi-billion-dollar clients have just gone out and acquired and grown. enter new markets, and it's all going great until you realize now we've created a mess. And usually over time, over months and years, you start to get the leadership team coalesced around this concept of, hey, we need to standardize. So that's one thing, is there's oftentimes an internal scalability tipping point, but then the other tipping point is external, and that is the software vendors themselves and the whole direction that technology is going with movement to the cloud and with AI and things of that nature. I think technology is changing so quickly with cloud and AI in particular that organizations that are still running older on-prem systems are now looking up and saying, hey, we're falling behind because there's technology is speeding up its rate of change, and we're still back here on our old, mainframe system or, old on-premise system, whatever the case may be. So I think those two things combined are the two factors that contribute to this tipping point that organizations often reach. But that tipping point, it takes months and years for that tipping point to actually happen, to where you get that internal alignment and the resources and the budgetary commitment and all that stuff to actually do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of switching gears and going to more change management, how do you think the length of employee tenure impacts resistance to process changes? And do you think that organizations with long-standing employees struggle more?
Yeah, I do. As a broad generalization, I think for the most part, organizations that have highly tenured employees and employees that are highly tenured themselves are the ones that struggle the most with change, not because they're any less valuable or because they want to resist change. In fact, it's the opposite. I mean, they're usually there for a long time. They've learned a lot about the organization. They know the organization inside and out. They've helped define the current state the way it is now. There's also this hidden dynamic under the surface of highly tenured employees where they've thrived and excelled in an organization because they could figure out how to do things better with a limited tool set. So there's a sort of pride and a heroic mentality that goes along with that now is suddenly jeopardized or threatened by new technology. So I always use the example because I think every organization has many people that fit this profile, but you've got that guy or gal who's been around for 20 years and they created that really robust, complicated spreadsheet that only they know how to use, but it works wonders. And when it works great. And they created that. They built that. They thrived and excelled in their role. Despite the limitations of technology, they figured out a way to solve the problem. And so now when you say, hey, we're going to take that away, we're all human. And that's a threat to the pride that we have in this role we've created for ourselves and this tool set that we've created for the organization and this value we've brought to the organization. That all gets undermined unintentionally when you start to say, we're going to bring in a new standardized system to replace that spreadsheet so that we don't have to rely on, potential errors and not knowing which version is the most recent and all the, manual processes that go along with that spreadsheet. Even though it's probably for the better for the organization longer term, in the short term, that's more of a threat to that person. And so they're going to, in some way, not, at the very least, not be quite as excited about the change as they might otherwise be if it wasn't something personal that affects them personally in that way. So I think highly tenured people, as a broad generalization, not always true, but more often than not, it's true. Highly tenured equals harder to change. And I think it's harder to change too. One last thing, harder to change too, because it's not a blatant resistance to change. It's not a sabotage type of resistance, which in some ways is better to have that because you can deal with that head on and it's so easy to see. But highly tenured people are more likely to want to be team players. And on the surface, they're trying to do everything they can to be a part of the solution and a part of that path forward. But underneath it all, there's insecurity and fear and doubt around what their job's going to look like going forward. And just that uncertainty creates unintentional resistance that doesn't come from a bad place at all. And so that makes it that much harder to identify and mitigate that risk.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I want to almost look into the future now. I know you just kind of mentioned, AI is ever changing within ERP implementations and systems. But with AI and automation becoming more integrated into these ERP systems, do you think that standardization efforts will become easier or even more complex?
I think it becomes more complex because with AI, with more flexible tools in general, it's sort of like it can be a good thing. It can create a lot of flexibility, a lot of options, but that good thing turns into a bad thing when all of a sudden we start changing stuff in the technology just because it's easier to do it. And so we therefore don't end up changing as much as we could change because it's easier just to change the software. So I think that that's where project governance becomes even more important. It's already important no matter what kind of project you're going through. But if you're going through a project that involves like best of breed or more of a platform model, an integration tool set, you have to be careful because you need to have governance in place that ensures you're not just paving the cow paths and going back to the way you've always done things because it's easy enough to change the technology to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one final question here. If a company is watching this and they're about to start their ERP journey, what is the single most important piece of advice you'd give them about standardization?
Most important piece of advice about standardization. I'd say don't view it as an either or decision. View it as it depends. I mean, treat your different business processes differently. Some processes are ripe for standardization and are important to standardize, and some aren't. And just take the time to sort that out early and be realistic about it, because it's easy enough to just go in and say we're just going to standardize, or we're just going to let all the individual business units operate independently, which most companies we work with don't do that, but some do, where they say, hey, we're not going to standardize. We're just going to let everyone be decentralized. I don't think that's the right answer either. I think every organization needs to be somewhere in the middle, and they need to define upfront what that is, because if you spend time trying to figure that out while the meter's running on your expensive consultants and your technical implementation consultants and the technical resources, that's where the meter in the budget starts to get out of control, and where time delays start to happen and budget overruns start to happen, is because you're trying to figure out what do we standardize and what don't we standardize, or you're trying to figure out like, why can't we standardize this one part of the business that we never should have been trying to standardize in the first place. And so that's the messiness that you need to work through up front before you bring in the SI and the software vendor to start deploying stuff. So I'd say, treat it all as not an either or, and make sure you get to that decision early as possible in the project. That's why phase 0 is so important to, before you get into the actual implementation, do a phase 0, a proper implementation plan, a blueprint, and get all that clarity lined up up front, so that when the system integrator comes in and the vendors come in, you've got a lot of clarity you can provide to them and a lot of direction you can provide to put the governance in place to manage that appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was a great piece of advice, and also just a great episode overall. I feel like there was a lot of great points made today.
Yeah, heavy on the business process side of things, which is great because we haven't dived into that in much detail lately. So it's great to have Scott on the show and to go through that clip. And I appreciate all your feedback and support and commentary on this episode, Darian. And I appreciate the audience's feedback and commentary as well. So thank you for being here. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday. Go to transformationgroundcontrol.com. Show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting. If you'd like to learn more about us and how we can help you in a tech agnostic way through your digital transformation, feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. Hope you all have a great week in the meantime, and we'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.